This is draft season. The college football season is over. We'll talk about that. We know the first 18 picks of the NFL draft and the order they will come in. We will talk about that. A lot more announcements for the Senior Bowl, guys declaring for the draft, that and a whole lot more coming up on this episode of Draft Season, presented by Visa. I am John Schmeelk, joined as always by Tony Pauline, who covers the draft and everything football for Sportskeeda. Tony, final game of real college football we're going to see until the draft. And it was an entertaining one for the while until Michigan pulled away at the end.
I mean, the first half, the game started off very exciting. I thought the first quarter and a half of the second half, it was a bit of a snoozer as we were texting back and forth, but then it kind of ended with a bang. But it turned out the way I thought it was going to turn out. From a game perspective, I did not think that Washington was going to be able to stand up to the lines of scrimmage, both the offensive line, the defensive line of scrimmage that Michigan was fielding. They had their moments, but they just could not really stand up to that. And I think more than anything else, love him or hate him, John Harbaugh is a terrific coach.
Yeah, look, this was an old school way to win a football game, right? Michigan runs for 303 yards on 38 carries, really dominant in the first quarter. Then Washington seemed to stem the tide a little bit, right? That's when they made their little bit of a run. They came back. They got it to with one score for a while. It was 20-13. Washington had a couple drives where they were only down one score with a chance to score. But again, it was that Michigan defense, Tony, whether it was their defensive front, they were just rushing four for most of the game. They were getting home with four, or at least pressuring Penix to force some incomplete passes. We'll talk about that. And then they covered well on the back end. But to your point, this was a win up front game for Michigan on both sides of the ball, which, given the way we've talked about their draft prospects from Michigan, has mostly been up front on both sides this year. Maybe not first round picks, maybe not even second round picks for some of these guys, but they have a lot of really good players up front on both sides. And that in the end ended up coming up on top against what has been a very dynamic Washington passing attack.
On the offensive line, mid-round, late round, priority free agent guys, power gap blockers that are not going to fit his own system, but guys that just go out there and compete every week and get the job done. And, the other disappointing thing, I thought and we'll get into it, the Washington offensive tackles were a little bit disappointing. I thought we saw the inconsistency out of Michael Penix, the quarterback that we have seen all season long. When he's on, he's great. When he's off, forget about it. And I think that cost Washington, really cost them severely.
Let's start with the good. We'll start with Michigan, then we'll shift over to Washington, Tony. And again, this running back combination, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, had not been as explosive as we saw last year, especially Donovan Edwards, but he popped a couple of long runs in this game. Just 6 carries, but 104 yards, 2 touchdowns. I thought heading into this game that Donovan Edwards was a guy that I thought would be wise to go back to school if he could get that full-time gig as the Michigan running back next year, improve his draft stock. But now I wonder if he's going to try to ride the wave here on his couple of big-time explosive runs that really helped change field position and change the game for Michigan in this contest.
Well, it's kind of funny because he had those runs early in the game. And my first thought was he must watch this show and see how disappointed John Schmeelk is in his play this year. And he took it to heart. He kind of played with a chip on his shoulder. But yeah, I mean, it was as much, I thought, the offensive line as it was Donovan Edwards just making great runs. And I think that has to factor in because, I mean, basically this entire offensive line and most of the backups are going to be playing in the NFL or fighting for jobs in NFL camps. But you can see the underlying talent with Edwards. You could see the athleticism. You could see the burst. You could see the way he basically beats defenders into the open field. He's shown himself to be a real good pass catcher out of the backfield in the past. So you've got all those ingredients. The problem, I think, for Edwards is he's just playing behind another terrific football player in Blake Corum and doesn't get the carries that he needs to develop his game. But the underlying skill is there. There were a lot of people who liked him coming into the season as a potential third-round choice. I don't think he's playing like a third-round pick. And like you said, he's got a big decision to make in front of him. I mean, if he enters the draft, he's probably going to be a day 3 guy. There are going to be some steep curves, but he's got to really develop his game. If he goes back to Michigan, it's probably going to be with a completely different offensive line, probably a new head coach. So there's a big decision he's got to make.
I'm going to back up my opinion here with some facts so people don't know I'm not just slandering people. Only a 497 rushing yards this year on 119 carries. Last year, he had 140 carries, so just 21 more. He had 991 yards, so almost a 500-yard difference on just a 21 carry difference. His yards per carry went from 7.1 to 4.2. So the explosiveness hasn't been there. But again, to your point, Tony, it'll be a real tough decision. We do know that Blake Corum, I don't know if we know for sure, but I think we both be blown away if Blake Corum did not announce for the draft. I'm sure he'll be in the mix there for which one of these running backs will be selected first. We'll talk about another guy that declared a little bit later in the show. 21 carries, 134 yards, 2 touchdowns. You see he doesn't have the top speed, Tony, but he's low to the ground. He creates great leverage. He is 213 pounds at 5'8", which means he's thick. He has those little shifty jump cut moves in the hole to make guys miss. And he was just pounding the ball in this game. And you saw what makes Blake Corum a very good college running back.
And I think he's going to be a good pro. I mean, he's not a great athlete. He doesn't have any single great skill except for the fact that whenever you hand him the ball, he finds ways to pick up positive yardage. He came up huge last night. He came up huge against Alabama. He was huge against Ohio State. The guy is just a tremendous football player. He's not your quote unquote feature runner. He's not going to be a number one back, but I absolutely believe, and I've thought this all along from watching him the past 2 years, some team's going to take him in the third round. And if they find a good spot for him as a situational pass rush, a situational ball carrier, a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield as well as he does, even blocks, he's going to have a long NFL career. He's not going to be an all-pro, but he's going to be a guy that in the right system is just going to be a real good player. He's been a terrific football player. He's a joy to watch because, he knows how to execute. He comes up big. He's resilient. He's a great story. And, he's short. He's not super fast. But all he does is whenever the game is on the line, when Michigan needs a big play, they give the ball to Blake Corum, and he produces for him.
How about the receivers, Tony? Colston Loveland, 3 catches, 64 yards in this game. Roman Wilson, 3 catches, 54 yards. Cornelius Johnson, 3 for 25. And those are the only receivers with positive yardage. Obviously, a tight end mixed in there, too. Your thoughts here on what you saw from that Michigan receiving group, and then, of course, we'll touch on the quarterback.
Well, I mean, Wilson is going to be a real good number 3 receiver at the next level. I think he's a 4th round, maybe a 3rd round prospect. We'll see him at the Senior Bowl. He's also got some return skills. He's the quickest of the group. He's the fastest of the group. He makes a lot of catches. He's a tough, feisty guy, but he's smaller. Cornelius Johnson, it's interesting about Cornelius Johnson. Coming into the 2022 season, he was graded by scouts as a potential 2nd-round pick. His game has kind of fallen off. His production has kind of fallen off, but he's a very reliable, big-bodied possession receiver. He's not what the league wants these days. He's not Roman Wilson in the sense that he can separate through his routes. He can separate through speed, but he's one of those guys who wins out for the contested throws consistently. The bigger, taller guy with long arms, very reliable. Again, he's going to go in the late rounds, but if you're looking for a number 4, number 5 receiver, a guy you can throw the ball to, the jump balls in the red zone on 3rd down, the bigger contested catch throw, that's your guy. You mentioned Colston. One of unsung heroes that I thought was A.J. Barner, the Indiana transfer, who's also a tight end. Doesn't have much in the way of pass-catching production. But if you watch his blocking was exceptional, especially on some of those long runs by Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum. Gets out on the 2nd level, on the line of scrimmage. And Barner's one of those guys that if he tests well, you're probably looking at a late-round pick, maybe a PFA. But he's someone who will make an NFL roster, I believe, as a 3rd tight end that's brought onto the field in short yardage situations, in goal line situations where you want that tight end to block for you and occasionally maybe go 4 or 5 yards off the line of scrimmage to be a short yardage pass catching threat. I thought Barner, he's played well all season long. I thought he played well against Alabama. His blocking really stood out to me last night.
Come for the championship game talk and stay for the blocking tight end on day 3 talk, baby. This is why we have Tony on the show. He has these guys all throughout the draft. Does a great job breaking it all down. All right, let's get to the quarterback, J.J. McCarthy here, Tony. And I said heading into this college football playoff, I wish I, could get to a game where he had to put the team on his back and carry him. I don't think we ever got there. We talked about the Alabama game on last week's show against Washington, against, frankly, a pass defense that, if you go back to those Oregon game, Tony's, it's not like, this team was locking down opponent passing attacks throughout the year, though they did a pretty nice job against Texas. Just 10 of 18 for McCarthy, 140 yards, no touchdowns, no picks, one sack. And now in his final 6 games, Tony, of this season, he had only one game of more than 150 yards passing. Just one. The 221 he threw for against Alabama. And then in his final, I'm doing quick math here, 7 games. In 5 of those games, he threw for no touchdowns. I mean, there's just not a lot there if you're going to count on drafting him as some high-level passer that's going to be a tractor for your team and not a trailer that gets pulled along for your team. I think there's a lot of projection here. I'm curious to see if he might even go back to school, if he would go to the Senior Bowl, if he came out. I just still think there are a lot of questions with McCarthy just because of how they're using him and the system that Michigan runs with such a focus on the run game.
And you could make the argument last night in the championship game against Washington, he was more effective running the ball than he was throwing the ball. I mean, he didn't really make, I don't remember any big plays that he made as a throwing the ball. He had a couple passes batted away, things like that.
He had a couple short passes where guys ran after the catch, but there was no really. You had the one roll out early, right, when he got it over the safety that was kind of retreating after starting in the box. But other than that, we're really not any big plays downfield.
I wrote an article last week at Sportskeeda on how he projects to the next level. And I said right off the bat, listen, J.J. McCarthy is a day 2 prospect that will probably be taken in the first round because of the position he plays, because of the need at 4 quarterbacks and the way quarterbacks are continually overdrafted. But I thought all along, when you look at him, when you grade him on a board, he's a day 2 prospect. He's maybe the 45th or 46th best player in the draft, but he plays the quarterback position and he does it well. I mean, you're right. He doesn't beat teams. He doesn't carry that offense on his shoulders, but he's an excellent leader. He has complete command and control of the offense. I've been told 2 things about McCarthy throughout this process. He's told his teammates that he's returning, yet he has a team that is basically narrowed down who he's going to sign with. And I think he's going to enter the draft. I think like Donovan Edwards, he's got to look at it the fact that he may not have his head coach, although they may have a great head coach in the wings there with the offensive coordinator who took over the last 3 games when Harbaugh was suspended. Plus, you're going to get a brand new offensive line in there. And even those guys were big and immobile. They did a good job for the most part protecting J.J. McCarthy. He's not a guy that is going to be a very early pick, that is a franchise quarterback. He's more of your game manager. And any team, I believe, that selects him, especially in the first round, is going to have to understand that. You're going to have to, you always want to surround your quarterback with good pieces, especially good left tackle, good pass catchers. But with McCarthy, I think you have to take it to the next level if you want him to succeed on Sunday. He's got great moxie, got great confidence. He's a guy who's a great leader. I just don't see him as a great passer, especially downfield passer.
All right, let's stick with the quarterback position. We'll do Washington's offense, then we'll switch over to the defenses for both teams here, Tony. And the one thing Michael Penix is not is a game manager. They put the game in his hands. He throws the ball down the field for good and bad. And we saw all the good against Texas last week when he threw for 430 yards and a couple of touchdowns. And I think people that probably didn't watch a lot of college football this year, they just tuned into that game. They saw the accuracy. They saw him even making some off-platform throws on the move, which something he hadn't really done too well under pressure over the course of the year. And then I think against Michigan, you saw some of the warts, right? Yep. It was by far, in my opinion, the best defense he had seen all year. Their offensive line at Washington, we're going to talk about these guys too. They've been really good all year. They've protected him. Michigan got to him a little bit. He had to move off platform. He couldn't just sit in the pocket and chuck the ball downfield. In fact, you saw on some of those end zone replays that he would have had guys down the field open, but the pass rush was getting there, and he had to get off those guys before they had a chance to free up down the field. So I think we saw some of the warts with him, his ability to create under pressure, throw off platform. He had a couple of balls batted at the line. His elbow dropped on a few of those throws. And then just ball placement down the field, especially when he wasn't able to just sit back there and throw, Tony. We saw some balls sail on him. He threw it behind a couple of guys. He overthrew Dinzier a couple times. So
Yep.
I think we saw some of the warts with Penix in this championship game against Michigan.
If there's a word to best describe Michael Penix, it's inconsistent. I mean, you don't know what you're getting from him week to week. Sometimes you don't know what you're getting from him from snap to snap. I mean, he makes some incredible downfield throws. And then there are times when he throws the ball where he's leaving his receivers hung out to dry and they're going to get, they're going to get smashed. He missed the Dunze twice early in that game yesterday. He missed him in the end zone where he would have been would have tied the score. Washington had to settle for a field goal. Then he missed him early in the second quarter down the right side where Dunze was wide open, where that would have kept Washington in the game. But that's been Michael Penix. I mean, he is not being a consistent, producer, high level thrower, say the Caleb Williams type, or even the Jaden Daniels type. And that's why he's going to go somewhere mid to late day two rather than the first round. Now, there are some mechanical things he's got to work out. Obviously, the past injuries are an issue that teams are going to have to look into. Age is also a factor. And the reason age is a factor is teams look at Michael Penix now at his age and they say, well, he doesn't have great upside. You compare him to J.J. McCarthy, you make the argument J.J. McCarthy, an underclassman, younger guy's got more upside because he's going to physically mature and things like that. So, I mean, Penix and when he's at the top of his game, he's a very exciting guy to watch. And you're like, wow, this guy's a classic vertical passer, sit in the pocket, just chuck the ball down the field. And then other times, like last night, I mean, he looks like a chucker is what he looks like. And there were opportunities last night, especially early in the game, pressure or not, where he had receivers open, like I said, Dunze, and he missed them. And where Washington could have been in the game, they continually played catch up. And that's what Michael Penix is. He's just very inconsistent. And like I said, you don't know what you're getting from him week to week. Sometimes you don't know what you're getting from him snap to snap. Great story, guy who should be given a chance. Hopefully we'll see him at the Senior Bowl. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of warts in this game, and we saw them last night.
So you think day two for him, Tony? You think he'll go after McCarthy, but on day two?
Yeah, I think he's going to go much later than people are projecting. I don't think he's a mid-second round choice. I think when you look at everything, the inconsistency with the accuracy in the pass placement, the injury history, the age, people are going to start to wonder, is this guy going to make it? And you saw him banged up last night. Is this guy going to make it to a second contract? I think he's going to be a bottom half of day two quarterback.
2 ACLs, a shoulder, 4 season-ending injuries for the people that don't know the injury history from his time in Indiana. Let's go to the offensive line here for Washington,
Yeah.
Tony. You can kind of reflect, if you want, on the Michigan defensive line as we do this, since there are the two units going up against each other. I thought Fatnu, the left tackle for Washington, pretty good, but I thought the right tackle had some issues throughout the game.
Rosengarten was just not good. I mean, he was getting exploited, and it wasn't like he was getting run over. I mean, he's an athletic guy who was a couple times. Harold took him to school there, beat him around the edge. So some of the other quicker pass rushers, and he really struggled. And Rosengarten, from what I'm told, is going to enter the draft. I have him as a second round pick. Some scouts say late second, early third. And he looked like, at best, a late day two pick yesterday, which is unusual for him.
And then how do you think Fatnu did on the left side? I thought he was better, certainly, than Rosengarten was.
Fontenot, a lot of teams like him as potentially the first guard selected in the draft. He's going to be a zone blocker. He's got a lot of upside for the next level. But yeah, I mean, he wasn't as bad as Rosengarten, but he had his hurdles last night against the Michigan.
What do you think of Michigan's front? Which one of those defensive linemen really jumped out to you that are draft eligible and might have helped themselves?
Well, we've talked about Chris Jenkins a couple of times, and he really, I know he's been playing with a high ankle sprain. I thought Harold, the edge rusher, had his moments yesterday. Braden McGregor. There was not one guy. I mean, this is typical of a Jim Harbaugh defense. And we go back to what we talked about when we had Bruce Feldman on. I said they play great team ball. And whether it was in the secondary, whether it was the linebackers, I mean, Junior Colson was not as good last night as he was against Alabama, but he was still really good. There wasn't really one guy. I mean, you let me know if I'm wrong. There wasn't really one guy that stood out.
No, I agree.
They all contributed. My only takeaway from that Michigan front is I know there've been a lot of people who talked about Chris Jenkins being a first round pick. I've never bought into that. I thought he was third round, maybe second round type guy. Like I said, he's been playing with a high ankle sprain. He's a quick one gap defensive lineman. Maybe goes earlier than I project because it's not a real deep class at defensive tackle. But again, it was a great team effort by Michigan, which I think proves what an outstanding coach Harbaugh is.
All right, let's go to the Washington receivers here, Tony. Again, Roma Dunze, 5 catches, 87 yards to lead the way, 17 yards per catch. Again, I think we saw the strengths there, right? He's able to get deep, take some contact, make a catch with a guy close to him. I thought they allowed the top, I guess, true sophomore, right? Cornerback for Michigan in this game. And Will Johnson be very physical with him. I thought he got called for that one hold on the little whip route. And then I thought he held on a couple others that weren't called. But I think we also, Dunze, we saw maybe the lack of suddenness at the top of his routes to create a lot of separation at the same time. And I was once again most impressed with Jalen McMillan. Even when they couldn't get him the ball, his quickness in and out of breaks and his ability to separate out of that slot spot. And he's not one of these tiny slot receivers either. He's got some pretty decent size for playing that spot at 6'1", 192 pounds. I thought he was good, and then Jalen Polk had a couple catches as well. He was 4 for 37.
It's kind of funny because Roma Dunze and Jalen McMillan kind of remind me of Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave back in a couple of years ago when they were at Ohio State. That sort of different type of receiver, although both are a step down from Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. I think a lot of last night was the reflection that Michael Penix was not on his game. Even that one long pass later in the game where it looked like Washington was going to get back was called back by because of a holding penalty on the Washington. I think it was Fernando. I may be mistaken on that one.
I think that was Rosengarten. I could be wrong, though.
Okay,
I think that was Rosengarten.
Didn't write it down, but Adunze, you're absolutely right. Adunze is going to be very interesting as far as scouting is concerned. Is he a Drake London type? How early is he going to go? He's tall. He catches everything. He comes through, in the big spot consistently for Washington. But as you said, as we've talked about all year, he doesn't have that great separation ability through his routes. He doesn't have that burst, which is what McMillan has. He's just a bit of a smaller guy. He's not a small guy, but he's smaller compared to Adunze. I thought Polk played relatively well last night. I thought both of their tight ends performed decently last night. I think they were hampered by the fact that Dylan Johnson, the running back, was suffering with a multitude of injuries, which basically put the emphasis more on the passing game, which they are anyway, but there really wasn't much of a threat of the running game there. That one running back, Will Nixon, dropped a bad pass on third down when they could have the first down. But Adunze, I think Adunze is a guy who, as far as I'm concerned, is going to be overdrafted. He's going to go somewhere probably mid-first round, if not early, by a team that needs a receiver, where he's more a bottom half of round one guy. And I think McMillan can be underdrafted in the sense that he's the guy who probably should fit into the late part of round one, early part of round two. He's probably going to go mid part of round two, depending on how these guys test at the combine.
And I thought the Michigan defensive backfield did play pretty good coverage, Tony. You mentioned Penix did miss some open guys, but I know a lot of people think Will Johnson's going to be that number one cornerback in next year's draft class. Anyone else from the back seven? I'll throw the linebackers in there too with this Michigan defense that really impressed you.
Well, I mean, I've liked Colson all along. I thought Sanistril, in my opinion, Mike Sanistril, the safety nickelback sort of hybrid type guy. He's a smaller guy. In my opinion, he is the Blake Corum of Michigan's defense. He's a guy who doesn't look the part, but just, makes play after play. Missed that tackle last week against Alabama, came back, had several big plays yesterday, had that interception. And I mean, he's a guy who I have him rated higher than most. I have him in the middle rounds. He's probably going to go late in day 3, but he's an exceptional nickelback, dime back, special teams player for the next level who just gets it between his head. And he's very explosive. The only problem with Senestrel is he's a little bit small, but he is a real good football player.
All right, let's jump over to the Washington defense then, Tony. Braylon Trice led the nation in pressures for a second straight year. He had been on a tear. He was active last week. And, we've talked about this Michigan offensive line a lot on the show this year, Tony. Maybe you're not going to get a first-round pick in there. And now who knows, with the injury to their big guard, whether or not we'll get a second-round pick as well. But they kept Braylon Trice and that Washington front pretty quiet throughout this game.
Yeah, I mean, some of the defensive backs had their moments. Jabbar Muhammad, Asa Turner was all over the place. Dominique Hampton. But yeah, I mean, Trice, I saw him once or twice penetrate the line of scrimmage, but Fatui, the ZTF, they call him, who was a guy who has had his moments, has come back from injury. He was invisible last night. And again, that's that Michigan offensive line that we talked about. They are big power graders, power blockers for that type of scheme at the next level. And they just manhandled, for the most part, I should say, the Washington front. And the only thing is J.J. McCarthy could not get the passing game going, which kept Washington in the game.
And Ulo Foshio, their middle linebacker, made a nice play on that little pass route into the flat, right? He got his hand in there and knocked that away. That was a really nice play by him over the course of that game. Anything else on that game, Tony, before we move on here?
No, I mean, I think that's the way I thought the game would go. Washington, who's going to be in the Big Ten next season, or this upcoming season, I should say, just could not hang with the big bodies of Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was sucking into it. I thought Washington would be able to throw the ball in that game, but that Michigan defense stepped up and they did a really, really nice job to their credit. All right, let's go to some of the news that came out. Two big-time players announcing that they're going into the NFL draft that still had eligibility left, Tony. You have Jonathan Brooks, the running back out of Texas, who I think we all thought was going to be the top running back in the class. Then he tore his ACL this year. He's going to come out anyway, so it'll be interesting to see how teams treat him. And then let's start there, and then I'll jump to the second guy. Your thought on Brooks?
I mean, I had Brooks as a potential second-round pick. The injury situation, throws a wrench into things. When is he going to be ready to play? We saw Breece Hall return so quickly from that injury, the Breece Hall of the Jets, that he suffered midway through the 2022 season. So it's a different game now. I think right now, especially for a running back who's not going to be able to test before the draft, and I've not heard that he's going to have any sort of testing. Maybe he has some sort of pro day where he catches the ball in stationary positions, things like that. Teams will get to look at his body type. But I think right now, you're looking at a guy who he's not. I'd be shocked if he goes day two. You're looking at more of a fourth, fifth round pick, given that it's the running back position, given the injury, given that you don't know when he's going to be able to play, and for an underclassman, he's not going to be able to test for NFL teams.
Then the other big name to announce at the draft, Chris Braswell, someone we've talked a lot about at the show, Tony. He was a little bit quiet in that semifinal against Michigan, but again, Michigan's offensive line, we've seen what they can do. He's not only heading into the NFL draft, he's also heading to the Senior Bowl. So it'll be fun to see Braswell down there in Mobile in a couple of weeks.
Which makes sense. They like Alabama kids at the Senior Bowl. They like SEC kids. Braswell, he's a favorite of yours really from the get-go. And I think he really started to develop this year and start to meet expectations when he was the guy out there. I think when we go to the Senior Bowl with Braswell, who, as Bruce Feldman told us, is going to test off the charts, want to see how he does making plays in reverse. We know he can rush the passer. We know he's a real good football player moving forwards. Can you use him off the line of scrimmage? In those drills, those pass catching drills, those pass coverage drills against the running backs, against the tight ends, as we saw last year with Dan Henley, who looked like a defensive back at the linebacker position. How does Braswell look? Is he able to stay with the running backs and tight ends on the field? Is he able to provide good coverage, or is he doing a lot of chasing? You don't want to do a lot of chasing. You got to be able to get your head back, make some plays on the ball. That'll be an interesting thing to see for Braswell. But he's headed in the right direction. He was a much better player in 2023 than he was in 2022, and that's what you want to see.
Absolutely. All right, we got a couple of big announcements for the Senior Bowl, Tony, at the quarterback position. Bo Nix, quarterback from Oregon, will be heading there, as will Notre Dame quarterback Sam Hartman. They join Pratt, Spencer Rattler, This is going to be a really nice quarterback group down there in Mobile for us to watch.
It was a great decision by Bo Nixon. I applaud him. I applaud the people who are, his representation team. As I said time and time again, and I tweeted this out, the Senior Bowl is a kingmaker, especially at the quarterback position. And now Bo Nix has a big opportunity in front of him. It's also going to be fun seeing him, the former Auburn quarterback, go back to the state of Alabama to play football. But good for him. He's accurate. He's got great. He's got it going on between the ears. He's got great poise. He sees the field. What we don't know about Bo Nix is how is his deep arm? Can he drive those deep throws consistently? And that's what we're going to watch for at the Senior Bowl. Do the deep passes hang? Do the receivers have to slow up in their routes and wait for the ball to get to him, a la Mac Jones? Or is he able to drive the ball down the field? If he drives the ball down the field at Senior Bowl practices and everything else falls into place as we would expect it would, Bo Nix is going to come out of the Senior Bowl as a first-round pick.
Yeah, Oregon had such a nice system where they got the ball out of his
Yep.
hands so quickly, Tony. And I'd like to see him operate in kind of a more traditional system that'll give scouts a better feel for exactly what he could do. Sam Hartman, we've talked a lot about. Here are some other guys, Tony, that have come out and announced that they will be attending the Senior Bowl. I'll just go through the list. You can then pick up whatever names you want. A lot of these names are ones that people are not going to be familiar with, but here we go. Kingsley Iguakan, the offensive lineman out of Florida, the center. Linebacker Tyrese Knight out of UTEP. Wide receiver Luke McCaffrey out of Temple. Defensive lineman Brennan Jackson out of Washington State. Offensive lineman Ethan Driscoll out of Marshall. His teammate, running back Rasheen Ali out of Marshall. Jaden Crumedy out of Mississippi State. Defensive lineman Javon Foster, offensive tackle. Marcus Harris out of Auburn, the defensive lineman. Kamani Vidal, the running back out of Troy. You could take any and all of those at your leisure, sir.
Luke McCaffrey first thing went to Rice. If it's listed as Temple, that's just a misprint. He actually went to Rice.
Oh, you know what? Actually, I just can't read my own handwriting. That's my fault.
There you go. Ed McCaffrey's son, Christian's brother, real good pass catcher. Not as good an athlete as his brother, but a guy who runs solid routes, a guy who knows how to find the open spot in the field, has been a real good pass catcher at Rice, fundamentally sound as you would expect him to be. I think if he gets drafted, he's going to be in somewhere in day 3, but a very reliable pass catcher. Javon Foster of Missouri, good decision by him to go to the Senior Bowl. He's a guy who has got the body type. He's got the athleticism. He can be all over the place, though. He's got to really work on his balance. But he's got, when you watch Javon Foster, and I've watched him for 3 years now, there's something about him that says, you know what, if he develops properly, if he's coached properly, he could be a starting left tackle in the NFL. He's got to work on his body. He's got to work on his feet. He's got to work on his balance, but he's got an upside. Rashawn Ali, the Marshall running back, he's a home run hitter. He's a guy where if there's a hole there, if there's a little bit of space, goodbye. Not a complete back, but a guy that's got great speed. He's got a great burst. Knight, let's go to Ethan Driscoll, the guy who blocked for Ali at Marshall. Bigger, stiffer guy, sort of a small area guy, played tackle in college. I think he may have to move to right tackle or even guard. And then Knight, the linebacker from UTEP, has been a tackling machine for the Miners. That has not been a real good program the past decade or so. Undersized. Oh, he's short. He's not undersized. He goes about 6'3", 6 foot tall, 235 pounds, but he's fast. He goes sideline to sideline. More of a run defender than a guy that you're going to use in coverage. Sort of a 2-down player, but has the underlying athleticism to develop into a 3-down linebacker. Like we said about Braswell making plays in coverage when the ball's in the air, going to want to see the same thing from Knight at Senior Bowl practices.
All right, so we got a lot of stuff coming up next couple weeks, folks. So next week, we're going to try to do a mock draft a little bit. We'll see if we do the full round. Maybe we'll just do 1 through 18. That's where we have the picks. So we're going to go through the draft order today. We're not going to do a full breakdown of each team. That's going to be next week. Then we're going to head into Shrine Bowl. Tony and I will both be there. We're going to head into Senior Bowl. Tony and I will both be there. We'll recap those 3 events. Then we're, frankly, into mid-February already. So we will have all of that coming up. So keep in mind, this is going to get spread out. We're still going to do 1 show a week until April. Maybe we'll try to squeeze some more. And then as we go, as we continue to cover everything in the NFL draft, then all of a sudden we're going to blink. We're going to be in Indianapolis for the Combine. So all this stuff comes fast and furious. You have pro days and all that stuff, 30 visits. It should be a lot of fun. But we do know what order the first 18 picks of this NFL draft will be in, Tony. Let's start up top here. We'll go through the top 6. You have the Carolina Panthers picking first. That goes to the Bears, obviously, because of that Bryce Young trade from last year. They were locked in heading into this week. Thanks to some strength of schedule tiebreaker advantages, the Washington Commanders get the second overall pick ahead of the New England Patriots, who pick third. The Arizona Cardinals, who lost a really tight one to Seattle in that last week, they maintain their selection at fourth. The Chargers pick fifth, and then the Giants slide in the sixth hole after beating the Philadelphia Eagles. So just real quick, Tony, from my perspective, Chicago, for me, I know they have a question with how Justin Fields is playing. For me, it makes sense to reset the quarterback clock on the contract. Yep. You get draft capital for Fields. You end up picking whoever the best quarterback is. Washington has a new owner. They're going to have a new coach. They're going to have a new GM. They're picking a quarterback, all right? So I think you take those first two, you say quarterback all the way. Then New England's interesting. Do they like the third best quarterback in this draft enough to select third overall? Do they risk trading down to try to get Jaden Daniels or whomever they think is the third best quarterback? Is Bill Belichick still going to be there? All questions we don't know the answer to. Arizona at 4. Kyler Murray played pretty well this year. I feel like they'll probably stick with him, though I wouldn't put it out of the question that he could be a guy they could trade and they could look quarterback if someone's sitting there. Chargers at 5. Look, that organization's starting over pretty much right now with the new head coach, new GM. Tom Telesco was let go. Their head coach was let go. They could go any number of ways here at number 5. I think you pick the best player. Offensive tackle wouldn't be a bad thing necessarily to help out your, blue chip quarterback and Justin Herbert. And then the Giants at 6. Look, pick an offensive player, whether it's a top wide receiver, whether it's a really good offensive lineman, maybe quarterback, depending on what they think of Daniel Jones and his recovery from the injury. That's how I view that top 6 in terms of how that kind of breaks down.
Well, here, I think it gets interesting with the Giants, and here's why. I think with your first 5 picks, it's going to be the top 5 players in Caleb Williams, Drake May, Marvin Harrison, Pajano of Penn State, and Brock Bowers. It may not be in that order, but I think those are the first 5 players that are going to be off the board.
You don't think you don't think either Joe Alt or Jaden Daniels could slide in there?
No, I think maybe Daniels. I don't think Alt. But that's why I think the Giants, that's where it gets interesting. I mean, did the Giants look to Jaden Daniels? Did Sean and Dable say, hey, listen, we want our quarterback? Do they take Joe Alt? And if they take Joe Alt, what does that mean for Evan Neal? So I think the 2 quarterbacks are going to go top 5. I think Marvin Harrison is going to go top 5. I think Fajano, because he's the best left tackle in this draft, is going to go top 5. I think Brock Bowers, because he's an exceptional athlete at the tight end position, is going to go top 5, probably to the LA Chargers. And then you got the 6th pick. And what did the Giants do? I mean, I agree with you. Right now, it's going to be offense. Would they take a quarterback? If they take Joe Alt, what do they do with him? Are they moving Joe Alt to right tackle? What are they doing with Evan Neal? That, for me, is right now where we sit, starting the second week of January. Before free agency, that's where it starts to get very interesting for me.
And that would set the record, right, for the highest a tight end has ever gone, right? Because didn't Kyle Pitts hold the previous record? If Bauer goes top 5, I think, I should have looked this up before we started, but I do not believe a tight end has been picked, or at least in like the last 30 years or so in the top 5.
Didn't the Niners take a tight end with the
Vernon Davis?
Yeah, I'm looking it up as we speak. So keep going.
I think Vernon Davis was top 10. I don't think he got into the top 5, though. I could be wrong about that. As you look that up, Tony, let's go through the next 6 teams here. We'll split them into thirds. Tennessee Titans are selecting 7. They let go of Mike Vrabel today, which he's going to get gobbled up real quick. He's a good head coach for a football team. The Atlanta Falcons, who are without a head coach as well, with Arthur Smith, are selecting 8th. The Chicago Bears, they have their own pick at number 9. And the Jets slide in at number 10. The Minnesota Vikings at number 11. And then the Denver Broncos slide in here, Tony, at number 12. Falcons, look, they have to take a quarterback at some point, right? I mean, they have to find an answer there. We'll see what they do in free agency. But that's something to keep in mind. The Jets, you could tell me better than I can. I'm thinking maybe offensive lineman. I could see the Bears taking, to help their quarterback. Do you take an offensive lineman there? Do you take a wide receiver? They need another pass rusher. Could this be Dallas Turner? That lands there at number 9 for Chicago. That's interesting. And then we have to see what the Vikings and Broncos do with their veteran quarterbacks, right? It certainly seems like Russell Wilson's not long for the world up there in Denver. What do they do there? And then what are the Vikings going to do with Kirk Cousins, and where do they try to improve? So I think some interesting flashpoints there.
Vernon Davis was the sixth pick of the 2006 draft. So I was a little bit off on that, but he was the sixth pick by the
No, we were
Niners.
close. We were close.
First thing is I agree with you about Tennessee. I think it's a little bit premature to get rid of Vrabel, who's a real good coach. I think if Alt is still on the board, that's the way they go. If somehow Alt isn't on the board, there may be a trade down opportunity for one of those top players that slide down, or maybe it's Malik Neighbors. Although that's a little that, in my opinion, would be a little bit early. I think that Atlanta really needs a quarterback, but they're probably going to miss out on Jaden Daniels. So it could be Malik Neighbors if he's available. Chicago, I mean, Chicago's in a good position right now. They could go defensive line. They could go offensive tackle. They could take a receiver. I think the Jets are in a very tough position because at number 10, they're going to lose out on the top offensive tackles, which they desperately need. I mean, the Jets need 3 to 4 starting offensive linemen.
It wouldn't
They're
shock me
lose-
if they made a move up to try to get one of those guys, Tony. With Aaron Rodgers on his short window here, that wouldn't surprise me.
It wouldn't, but the problem is this: is it's not just like they need one offensive line.
Right.
I mean, they need 2 starting offensive tackles. They need at least 1 starting offensive guard. You don't know about is Vera Tucker coming back? Like Tomlinson has not played well. They need a receiver. I mean, last year they passed on Jackson Smith-Njigba in favor of Will McDonald, who was a 2 or 3 year project where Jackson Smith-Njigba. So I think with the Jets, it's going to be. I think they're in a tough position. Maybe they trade down and get extra selections. Trading up, I mean, they don't have all that much draft capital. I agree with you what you said about Aaron Rodgers, but then the argument is why they take Will McDonald last year, right? Minnesota could use a QB, could use an edge rusher. Maybe Dallas Turner goes there. I think Dallas Turner would be an excellent fit there. Denver, a cornerback, possibly. I mean, they need cornerbacks. Kool-Aid McKinstry's on the board, or Wiggins are on the board. Maybe this is where they go. Las Vegas, let's see what happens with the Raiders. Does Jim Harbaugh go there as all signs point to him, or at least him being the favorite to be there? If he goes there, does he take J.J. McCarthy with him, which is what I've heard? If it's not, they need a defensive tackle. John Newton, the big defensive tackle from Illinois, who I think is going to get a lot more buzz as we get closer to the draft, that would be a perfect fit. New Orleans always looking for an edge rusher, always looking for offensive linemen. The song remains the same as Robert Plant used to sing with that team. The Colts, cornerback or edge. What you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of teams that need cornerbacks and edge rushers really through the first 20 picks, and they're going to be off the board. And those teams in the bottom third of round 1.
Yeah, Tony, cornerbacks, edge rushers, offensive tackles. That's going to be a common refrain for all these teams.
Yep. Exactly. And the thing is you got your top 2 offensive tackles who are going to be off the board quickly. The cornerbacks starting probably around pick 9, 10, 11, 12. And the receivers, the first 2 receivers will be off the board very quickly. And then the question is, how highly do teams value Rome Odunze? Do they look at him as a top 15, top 12 pick? Or do they say, like a Drake London? Or is he a guy that, real good college receiver, good pair of hands, but he's going to struggle to separate on Sunday?
Yeah, and then let's go through the final couple picks in the round here. The Colts, they come right after the Saints. Shane Steichen's done a great job there, right? They got a nice set of receivers there to go with Richardson when he comes back. I think offensive line help there might be somewhere they look to try to improve. Seattle, I mean, they're still trying to win now. I think they had a disappointing year not making the playoffs. They added Leonard Williams midseason to try to make a little bit of a run. They couldn't do it. They're always looking for pass rush help up front on defense. I can see them going there. Jacksonville, they just fired their whole defensive staff, right? Doug Peterson, I could see them going wide receiver. Calvin Ridley's a free agent there, Tony. Does he go back there? With what's going on with him? And then you have the Cincinnati Bengals, who are picking 18th here. They won that last week, which kind of bumped them down almost 5 or 6 spots in this draft order in that win against Cleveland when Cleveland rested all their guys. And what does Cincinnati do, right? Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins could both leave via free agency. I think you still need to improve the offensive line to protect Joe Burrow, who seems to be perpetually hurt. So I would probably lean offensive line for them.
And they're probably going to lose Jonah Williams, the right tackle, left tackle, right tackle, the free agency. So I think what happens is that's where those that second tier of offensive tackles start to come off the board, whether it's Tyler Guyton, whether it's Fuega of Oregon State, sort of in that Cincinnati range, the last team to last non-playoff team in the group. So I think that's going to. I think they need receiver, but I think that they also have a greater needed offensive line, like you said, to protect Burrow. And I think offensive tackling way is going to be the greater need right now. I mean, Jacksonville. I mean, you got to do a better job protecting Trevor Lawrence. You got to give him better weapons. Yet at the same time, they're probably going to go on the defensive front, especially on the defensive line, maybe an edge rusher. And if you look at the Jaguars' history, the past 5, 6 years, they've expended so many first-round picks on Josh Allen, Walker, the kid from LSU who you never hear about anymore.
Caleb Von Chasen, right?
They've used so many early draft picks on these guys, and again, they're in a position because it didn't work out. I think with Seattle, I agree with you. Probably an edge rusher, defensive lineman, Jared Verse of Florida State would be a good pick there. I think Indianapolis could use an offensive line, but I think they're going to be another team that are looking primarily cornerback or edge rusher. In the middle, that sort of middle section, or as you get out of the top 10 of round one.
And by next week, with the wild card round done, Tony, we'll know the first 24 picks, too. So we'll try to go in and do a little 24-pick mock draft next week. That should be kind of fun as we start heading into the All-Star game season. Tony, fun as always, my friend. Go check out his work on sportskeeda.com. And, Tony, we'll talk to you next week.
Look forward to it, John.
For Tony Pauline, I'm John Schmeelk. This has been Draft Season presented by Visa. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and keeping track of what we're talking about and the draft with us over the next few months as college football season's over, folks. It's draft season. Stay with us.